Hello, health lovers. So, it's your cute student Nurse V, and still on the endocrine system. Today, we are going to be talking about the thymus gland. Now, what's the thymus gland? So, the thymus gland is an irregular shaped gland that is located just beneath the thyroid gland. So, it lies behind the sternum and it resembles a lymph node. So, if you look at the image of the thymus gland, it closely resembles that of a lymph node. Now, moving forward, we are going to talk about the gross anatomy of the thymus gland. So the thymus gland is divided into two lobes. So we have the outer cortex and we have the inner medulla. So the outer cortex contains immature T cells, and once these T cells are matured, they divert into the inner medulla. So the inner medulla is the inner layer and it contains mature T cells. So that takes us to the microscopic structure of the thymus gland. So the thymus gland is composed of quite a number of cells, and we have the epithelial cells. So the epithelial cells act as a protective barrier against infection. Then we also have the Kuchinsky cells. So the Kuchinsky cells is the main cells that secrete the thymus hormone. So the main cells that secrete these hormones from the thymus gland is the Kuchinsky cells. Now we have the myeloid. So this myeloid triggers autoimmune responses from the muscles. Now we have the B lymphocyte. B lymphocytes fight against antigens and viruses, bacterial infection, any kind of infection that attacks the body. Then we also have the T cells. So the T cell is also a type of a white blood cell that is responsible for the immunity of the body. Now moving forward, we are going to be talking about the hormones secreted by the thymus gland. So the thymus gland secretes several hormones. So we have the thymoxine, we have the thymolene, we have the thymic humoral factor, and we have the thymopoietin. So the thymus gland secretes 4 hormones. So moving forward, we are going to talk about the organs in association. So if you remember earlier, we said that the thymus gland lies immediately after the thyroid gland. So superiorly is the thyroid gland. Now remember, we also made mention that the thymus gland lies behind the sternum. So anteriorly is the sternum. Now, since the thymus gland is in the thoracic cavity, so laterally, that at both sides of the thymus gland, we are going to have the lungs. So laterally to the thymus gland is the lungs. Now medially is the trachea. So we are done with the organs in association, and moving forward, we are going to be talking about the blood supply. So arterial blood supply to the thymus gland is the internal thoracic artery, and the venous drainage to the thymus gland is the left brachiocephalic veins. So moving forward, let's talk about the nerve supply. And nerve supply, as usual, is always the sympathetic and the parasympathetic nerve supply. So that takes us to the next gland of the endocrine system, and that is the gonadotrophin. So we are going to be talking about the gonads. So now the gonads comprises of 2 testes in male and we have 2 ovaries in female, and this is the primary reproductive organ of the human body. Now, moving forward, let's talk about the testes. So this testis lies below the abdominal cavity and is enclosed in a sac. Now, the sac that encloses these 2 testes is called the scrotum. Now, if you talk about the feedback mechanism, it's entirely under a negative feedback mechanism. So it involves the hypothalamus, and the hypothalamus sends the releasing hormones. Then it also involves the adrenal hypophysis, that is the anterior pituitary gland, which is going to release either the luteinizing hormone and the follicle stimulating hormones. Now, let's talk about the hormones secreted by the testes. So the testes secrete just one hormone, and that is the testosterone. So the testosterone is the primary androgen for males. So it's the primary sex hormone for the male. So now we are going to be talking about organs in association. So organs in association, posteriorly is the epididymis. So now the blood supply to the testes is the gonadal arteries. So venous drainage is the gonadal veins. So nerve supply is the sympathetic and the parasympathetic. Moving forward, let's talk about the 2 ovaries in female. So there are 2 ovaries in female. So it lies at each side of the uterus. So the uterus is medial to these 2 ovaries. So it lies in a shallow depression called the ovarian fossa. Hormones secreted by these ovaries, we have 2 primary androgens that are secreted by this ovaries. So we have the estrogen, which is responsible for puberty, and we have the progesterone, which is for menstrual cycle and pregnancy. So we are going to talk about the feedback mechanism, and the feedback mechanism for the hormones secreted by the ovaries is entirely under a negative feedback mechanism, but most time under a positive feedback mechanism. Now let me explain that. Now for the negative feedback mechanism, the progesterone and the estrogen sends a signal to the hypothalamus, and what it does is that it sends this signal to the hypothalamus to release and inhibiting hormones. So this inhibiting hormones is going to act in the anterior, is going to act on the anterior pituitary gland, and is going to inhibit the follicle stimulating hormone and the luteinizing hormone. Now this action is done to reduce the number of eggs that are produced in a day or in a given number of time. Now for the positive feedback mechanism, mostly high estrogen leads to ovulation, and that is when we have a positive feedback mechanism. So it's mostly under a negative feedback mechanism. Now we talk about organs in association. So superiorly is a fallopian tube, and medially is the uterus. Now blood supply to the ovaries, we have the gonadal arteries and we have the gonadal veins. Now nerve supply is a sympathetic and parasympathetic. So see you in my next video, as I'm going to be rounding up everything about the endocrine system. And do well to like, share, and subscribe to my YouTube channel. So thank you. Bye.